Hello, my name is RudTurnbull. I'm a distinguished professor of special education here in the Department of Special Education, the School of Education at the University of Kansas, and it's a pleasure to talk with you for a few minutes. I have been asked to talk about the 6 principles that govern the federal special education law and to answer a question that some of you might have, which is, well, it's a law, but is it a living law? How does it make a difference? So let me address those 2 concerns or those 2 matters, but let me begin by quoting an English poet. Now that may be a strange way to begin, but if you bear with me for a second, we'll connect English Romantic poetry to the federal law and to its meaning. The English Romantic poet John Keats wrote a poem, pretty well-known poem, called The Ode on a Grecian Urn. And in that poem he wrote these lines: "Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. That is all there is to know and all ye need to know." Now, how does that connect to special education and to this law? Well, the law is called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a good idea. Got it? And there are 6 principles of that law that really are the truth and the beauty of the statute. And if you know these, that's all you need to know. I'm going to give you an overview of what those 6 principles are, and then I'm going to talk with you about the statute as a living document. The first principle is zero reject. And what that basically means is that no child who has a disability, that is to say, no child who cannot successfully learn in general education, may be excluded from public education. No child. It doesn't matter what the child's disability is or how much of a disability the child has. No child may be excluded. Every child has the right to a free, appropriate education. All means all. Now, the first step then is to comply with zero reject, and you do that by enrolling the child. Let's say the child has a disability or seems to have a disability. The next step is to conduct a non-discriminatory evaluation. That is to say, an evaluation that is fair. It does not prejudice the child. There is no bias because of language, where the child was born, the child's culture, the child's race. No bias at all. We seek to have an absolutely reliable picture of that child. And we do that for 2 reasons. First, we want to know if the child has a disability. And second, if the child does have a disability, what are the educational consequences of that child's disability? Now, this matter of educational consequences takes me to the 3rd principle of the statute, and that is appropriate education. An appropriate education is one that is specially tailored to meet the child's strengths and needs, and it yields a benefit. Education that doesn't yield a benefit is not appropriate. The idea on appropriate education is that we create an individualized education plan for the child that takes educators from step 1 to step whatever in order to give a chance for that child to benefit. Next question is, where does the child's education occur? And that brings us to the principle of the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment, Congress had said, is the general curriculum. And by that we mean the academic curriculum, the extracurricular, and the other school activities. The presumption at the law is that the child will be educated full-time, part-time, some full, some part, in the ordinary, normal, general, regular education environment. That's where the child can learn about how to be in this world. And most of all, that's where the child and other children with disabilities and other children who do not have a disability can come together and begin to appreciate what each of them has and how each of them is a valued person. Now, zero reject, non-discriminatory evaluation, appropriate education, and least restrictive environment. These are inputs into the child's education. Now, there are two more principles, and each of them assures some accountability. The first one is called procedural due process. Now, I was trained as a lawyer, and procedural due process is very simple. It is about being fair. And if you're not fair, if you're not doing your job properly, you have to have a way to raise a grievance and to settle that grievance. And procedural due process does just that. The sixth and the last principle is parent participation. That's the right of the child's parent and eventually of the child to participate in making decisions about the child's education and to do that with the educators. Now, 6 principles. And you might say, well, you've told me a little bit about truth and beauty, but you haven't told me yet whether the law is a living law. And now let me tell you about it. It is absolutely a living law. And here's why. First of all, it's a civil rights statute. It's a statute born out of the violation of the rights of children with disabilities to have an equal opportunity, equal protection under the United States Constitution. So let's begin to say Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a civil rights law, like any other civil rights law, protecting any other group of people who have experienced discrimination in America. Many people don't see it as a civil rights law. They think of it in its second form, which is as an education law, and there's no question about it. It is an education law. It tells educators and families and children what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, and even why to do it. It being provide an appropriate education. There's no question that it's a law about civil rights and education. But when you combine civil rights and education, you begin to see its third nature, which is that it's a law that changes the culture of our country. We begin to say in this law, everybody has the same right of education. Everybody who has a disability gets a benefit from the education, and by putting civil rights together with education, we begin to tell ourselves that there's a different kind of culture we want. It's an accepting culture. It's a welcoming culture. It's a culture that says we need to change the schools so that we can change the world outside of the schools and in American communities. It is a powerful cultural change statute. That's the third type. Fourth type is that it's a statute about participatory democratic decision-making. And I want to use the words participatory and democratic because the statute allows for educators, families, and children alike to be together, to make decisions. And when the parents and the children have rights to participate in decision-making, they are the governed who are working with agents of the government, which is the school. So it's a statute about democracy in action. And finally, and this is kind of hard to get, finally, it's a statute about dignity. Because if we can provide a free, appropriate public education to all children who have a disability, we begin to see them in a different way. We begin to see them as whole people, not people with a disability, as having strengths, as being more like us than not like us. And once we see people that way, that they are less able but not less worthy, less able but not less worthy, we start to say, well, they have a certain personhood, there's a certain thing about them which these schools dignify by providing an education. It's interesting to think of IDEA as a statute that provides dignity. And if I could rewrite the statute or educate you, I would suggest that it begins to have a new name, the Individualized Dignifying Education Act. If you come to the University of Kansas, I hope that I'll have the chance to teach you. And if I do have that opportunity, this is the first lesson I will give you, the one I've just spoken, but it's also the last lecture of the last class that we will have together. There is something beautiful, to go back to John Keats, there's something beautiful about a statute that is so big, so full of words, but ultimately can boil itself down to a few key ideas. Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. IDEA is a truthful, beautiful statute. Come to KU and let's learn more about it. Thank you very much.